Ecclesiastes. Let's read the first 11 verses. Solomon is speaking to us, and you can sense the futility of what he's saying. You may be depressed by the time we get to the verse 11, but hang on. By the end of the service, we'll bring you up a little here. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man in all of his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passes away, another generation comes. The earth abides forever, the sun rises, the sun goes down, it hastes to the place that it arose from, the wind blows towards the north, south, it turns again to the north, it whirls around continually, the wind returns according to its circuits. There are rivers, they run into the sea, and the sea is not full, and the place where the rivers come from, they return again. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing. The ear is not filled with hearing. And the thing that hath been, it is the thing which shall be. And that which is done is what shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. This guy needs to talk to somebody. Solomon. Now, there are volumes written on the reasons why this might not be Solomon. And what we say about those volumes is vanity of vanities, all is vanity. It says right here in verse 12, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. The last king over Israel in Jerusalem was Solomon. David only had one son that was king over Israel. After that, there was a divided kingdom, and every king in Jerusalem was king over Judah, not king over Israel. So there's only one person this could be, and it's abundantly obvious and there. So Solomon, important to the point of what we're saying here. This is Solomon, and he is saying, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man in all of his labor which he takes under the sun? This is the message that he is preaching. And he has some key words throughout this book for us. Vanity is certainly one of them. He uses it 38 times in 12 chapters. And it speaks of emptiness. It speaks of something that, like the wind or breath that has gone. But it isn't just emptiness because it's relative to human experience. So it's in the sense of futility or absurdity. It isn't just emptiness, or that wouldn't bother us if it was just nothing. It's nothing in the sense that life ends up to be nothing, and it produces within us a sense of despair, of futility, of absurdity. And that's the sense that he uses the word. He says, what profit hath a man under the sun in all of the labor he does? He uses that word profit. It means advantage. 10 times in 12 chapters. He speaks of man, and he does it in the sense of Adam, and he's always pointing to man that's made of the dust of the ground, because that's the futility he's talking about, and he uses that term 49 times in 12 chapters. He says, in all of the labor that man has, and there are, I forget how many words in the Hebrew that are translated labor. This one is specifically labor to the point of exhaustion, and it's used 23 times in 12 chapters. So as Solomon talks about the labor that men labor in, it is laboring to the point of exhaustion, and he says all of that takes place under the sun. The idea is in the context of this material world, and he uses that phrase, under the sun, 29 times in 12 chapters. So he has something to say to us. That is, man, life is pointless sometimes. It seems pointless. It seems empty. It seems frustrating even to try to live another day. What is the point of it all? Why should I try? Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And what's the point? Man, he's made of the dust of the ground. What advantage does he have in working hard and laboring constantly to the point of exhaustion under the sun? There's nothing to it. What is the point of it all? Now, it isn't just 12 chapters of depression. So I don't want you to get that sense. His point is that it is sheer folly trying to satisfy ourselves with things of this world alone. And it's important that Solomon is our author because he is the wisest man who has ever lived. And what he has to say as he gets into this book is wisdom is just folly. Wisdom is vanity, because the smarter you get and the more you're able to look around and see what's going on, you'll just be more frustrated than ever. He's the wisest man that ever lived. He is the wealthiest man that has ever lived. In chapter 2, he's going to tell us in the first 11 verses, I saw all this emptiness, vexation of spirit. All is emptiness and frustration. So I determined I was going to do an experiment. Sure, Solomon. He says, I gave myself to pleasure. I just figured that's it. I'm going to indulge. Now, this is a man with 700 wives and 300 concubines. If he did that over a 50-year period, that's 1,000 wives. From when he was 20 to when he was 70, that would mean he'd have to have at least 20 weddings a year. That would mean every 2 to 3 weeks he'd have another wedding. Now, those of you who might be planning a wedding, think of that nightmare. 1,000 wives. And he said, I decided I'm going to indulge myself. Now, let me tell you why this is important. This is a man, when he was young, he was tender, it says, before the Lord. He was a believer. And he said to God Almighty, when God said, Solomon, I'm giving you a blank check. You can have anything. You're all sitting there thinking, And you know what he said to God? He said, Lord, give me a hearing heart. Give me the kind of heart that can hear you so that I might have wisdom to rule over this people. And God said, Solomon, because you didn't ask for gold, you didn't ask for treasures, you didn't ask for the life of your enemies, I'm going to give all those things to you besides. So what would happen if God came to you and I and said, ask anything, I'll give you? We would say, I'll ask for wisdom because I'll get all the other stuff. But he knows your heart. You'd never work out. But Solomon, look, he starts out young and tender, walking with the Lord. And as the years go on, he becomes jaded. His heart becomes hardened towards the Lord. The 3 basic things that God said no king should give themselves to is women, gold and silver, and returning to Egypt for horses and chariots. And Solomon had 1,000 wives. It says in his day, gold was so common. He overlaid buildings with gold. He made for his special forces around him gold shields, over 200 of them, shields made of gold for the soldiers. They say, tradition says he was accompanied by men, I forget, like 13 running on each side of his chariot that were his runners. They had to be over 6 foot tall. They had to be young. They had to have raven black hair, and they sprinkled gold dust on their hair every morning. They wore white silk. They ran next to his chariot with spears, and when they ran, you could see their hair glistening. You see, people do that today, put that sparkle stuff on their face. Now, this was real gold. He was way before you guys. See, there's nothing new. It says that which shall be has already been done. So he says, I gave myself to pleasure. And then he said, I decided what I would do is I would give myself to wine. Not because just an experiment, so I could take notes and, sure, Solomon. And he gave himself to intoxication, to being inebriated. Then it says, then I decided to build. So he built great buildings, great houses. Then he said, well, then, what's a nice building without nice landscaping? So then he said, then I planted gardens, I planted vineyards, I planted orchards, I planted trees from all over the world. And then when I got all that planted, I thought, Japanese gardens are nothing without ponds. So then he said, I created ponds to put in the gardens. And then, of course, you need somebody to cut the grass. And then he says, I hired men servants and maid servants. He said, I had so many servants, I even had servants born in my own house. And then he says, then I decided to collect gold. I collected gold. And he said, then treasure, then peculiar things that only kings collect. And then he said, well, then I decided what I would do is I got men singers and women singers, and I filled my house. You guys get the latest CD. He bought the band and put the band in his living room. And he said that he gave himself to all of those things. Whatsoever my eyes desired, I kept not back from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. My heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. Behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. What Solomon is saying to us is it ain't out there. And he's trying to save us from the if I only hads. That's an infection we get. If I only had, if I only had, if I only had, if I only had this, if I only had one. If I only had one of these, you get one and you know that you really meant if I only had two of these. And if I only had some of this. Now, if I could only get this nailed down, if I could only, then I'd be satisfied. Solomon says, wait, stop there. Because then you're going to be saying, well, if I only got this, if I only could get my break, if I could only get in a movie, if I could only make my first $200 million, if I could only be governor, if I could only, you keep moving on from one thing to another. You're a sports star with everything in the world going for you. You're a beautiful wife, and you end up denigrating your life. You end up nothing satisfied. And Solomon says this, women, I had 1,000 of them. And I gave myself to pleasure. Wine, I had the best from all over the world. I gave myself to it. Building homes, homes in the mountains, homes down the shore. You want to have a boat? I had a fleet of ships. And they would go around the world and bring back peacocks and monkeys because I was bored with the stuff I had. You like music? You like the latest rock band? I bought my own rock band. If they had a number one hit, I bought the band. I bought the record company. I bought them all. I put them in my living room. You like quad? I had the band. And what he's trying to say to us is, under the sun, that the world is filled with people that are frustrated and empty, thinking if they had a little bit more, they would be satisfied. The kingdom is filled with believers whose hearts grow cold and think that there's something under the sun instead of over the sun that will bring them some level of satisfaction. And in the end of the book, he says, I'm trying to save you from the pain of that illusion. Life, he says, under the sun is monotonous and it is pointless. Now, many people jump to that because he's jumping to conclusions, and you know Christians like that. They jump to conclusions. In fact, some Christians, that's the only exercise they get is jumping to conclusions. He says it's monotonous. What profit, what advantage is there in all of that labor, amassing all of that, bringing all of that together? There is no amount of money you will ever have that will match the amount of money he had. There is no amount of pleasure you will ever have. There is no amount of entertainment you will ever have. There's no amount of anything you will ever touch that will equal what he had. And he wasn't satisfied, and he's saying to us, don't bother. But he says someone who views life as something that takes place under the sun, in creation itself, in the material world, lives with that tremendous level of frustration. And he's going to tell us two things. In verses 4 to 7, he's going to say nothing ever changes. In verse 8, he's going to say nothing ever satisfies. And in verses 9 to 11, he's going to say, and there ain't anything that's ever new. So you're never going to be satisfied. In verse 4, he starts by saying this. Look, the preacher. One generation passes away, another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The monotony of life. And somehow it seems he's standing in the middle. David, his father, has passed away. I believe he's writing this as an old man. He sees a generation coming up behind him, and his son is a rascal, and he's thinking he's going to say, you accumulate wealth and you'll leave it to your son who's a fool, and he squanders everything. And he looks around and he says, this is the way it's always been. One generation comes, they start to grow older, they're teenagers, there's some older person telling them, enjoy life, kid, because it goes by so fast. Before you know it, it's half over. Then before you know it, and then the kid's a teenager. They're enjoying life, thinking, I can't believe these old fogies tell me the same stuff. And then the kid ends up in his 30s and 40s. Pretty soon, he's an old fogey telling some kid, hey, kid, enjoy it. It goes by so fast, and just, Solomon says, I looked, and there's people dying and people being born. Life is a parade, and all it is coffins and cradles, coffins and cradles, coffins and cradles. People are born, people die. It goes on and on. It is monotonous. And then you add to that our public school system teaching kids that evolution is the reason for our existence. You got here by mistake, and you're leaving without purpose. Lightning struck some pond scum millions of years ago, and that's your great-great-grandma, and you're here by mistake. You have no purpose. You ain't staying long, and you're going to be dead and gone without meaning. So here are some condoms in our public high school so you don't reproduce too fast. And if you get pregnant, just come and see us. We'll take care of your abortion because life has no more value than that anyway. And somebody who buys into that philosophy is either going to be an alcoholic, a drug addict, or commit suicide. And our society is filled with it. And the sad thing is, there's too much of it in the church. Oh, not to the percentages that the world sees it, but we see it amongst us. Suicide. Don't go into the presence of God without an invitation. Don't barge in. Divorce. Drug abuse. Alcohol abuse. It's from looking at life strictly in the context of under the sun. You read the obituaries, people coming, people going. And it's amazing that they die in alphabetical order, isn't it? I always wondered that. He says this, there's a monotony. One generation passes away, another generation comes, the earth stays the same, people come and go, and the same mountain is sitting there that saw Hannibal cross it, and saw Napoleon cross it, and saw people dig a tunnel through it, and the mountain stays, and the people come and go. The earth abides. There's frustration to this. He talks about the earth, the sun, the wind, the water. The sun rises, the sun goes down. Sounds like a song, doesn't it? Sunrise, sunset. Maybe that's one of his 1,000 songs somebody stole. And it is panting. It looks like it's panting to go back to the place that it arose from every day. The sun comes up in the same place, it goes down in the same place. Why can't the sun come up in the north someday? Why can't it arise in the west someday? Every day, sun up, sun down, sun up, sun down. East, west, east, west. And then he says, and the wind. South, north, south, north. Now, this is before satellite photography, too, so it is amazing what he says here. The wind goeth towards the south, it turneth around, it comes to the north, it whirleth about continually. The wind returns again according to its circuits. Of course, when we see satellite photography, we see those big masses and the way they turn and they move. Solomon says he was already frustrated with that a long time ago. The rivers, they run into the sea is never full. Then the place they came from, they return, the evaporation, it falls, the water comes, it goes into the sea's never full, the water evaporates, turns into rain, it goes back, it comes down into rivers, goes back to the sea. This guy's a depressed character, I'm telling you. So he says nothing ever changes. That's his first point. It doesn't change, it's monotonous. And I sit in the middle of it all with more pleasure, more money, more wine, more entertainment, more of anything. I satiated myself, and I am frustrated and vexed and empty. It's absurdity. It's futility. And nothing ever satisfies. That's what he says in verse 8. All things are full of labor. Man can't even utter. He can't even explain it. The eye is never satisfied. You know that your eye has an appetite. People will say, feast your eyes upon that. Boring, or get a load of that, look at that, The eye is never satisfied. He says that to us in the book of Proverbs, too. We look at this and look at that, and the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. Look at this. I wish I had this. The eye is never satisfied because it's attached to an empty place inside of us. And man searches and scours the world. And he wants to see further, so he gets telescopes. He wants to see smaller, he gets microscopes. Now we have televisions, entertainment centers. We fill ourselves with pornography in our homes and every visual thing that we want to put in front of us. The kids' movies now, 3D. I'm going to go see that. Try to satisfy my eye. I want to see a 3D movie. Like those little blue and red glasses. I haven't had those on since I was a kid, and the 13 Ghosts came around in the movie theater. But nobody here remembers that. But all things just repeat themselves. Nothing's new under the sun. They just come and they go. He says that here. The eye is never satisfied. The ear, he says, it's never filled with hearing. Music. Got to get the next CD. Got to get the next album. Because this was number one on the charts for 2 weeks. But now something else was number one. See, if the ear was satisfied, something would become number one and stay number one from then on. Never satisfied. Gossip. Some people, just their ears drool. Did you hear? No, I didn't hear. And never satisfied. The ears never satisfied. My wife, married 25 years. Do you love me, honey? Yes, I love you. Going to work now. Okay, honey. See you later. You love me? Yes, I love you. Talk on the phone. Okay, honey. We'll see you when you get home. You love me? I love you. I love you, honey. Do you love me? Yes, I love you. In the dark, lights are out, ready to go to sleep. I love you, honey. Do you love me? Yes, I love you. Ears never full. And that's okay. I don't mind saying that for the next 25 years. That's no problem. And it should be said. But the ear is never full of hearing. Nothing satisfies. That's what he's saying. And the thing that frustrates him about that is there isn't anything new coming that has the promise of satisfaction. He says this, the thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. You keep those bell bottoms long enough, they're coming back. You may not be able to fit in them anymore, but you could save money and give them to your kids. The thing that has been, that's the thing that shall be, he says. And that which is done is that which shall be done. There's nothing new under the sun. Again, I have this National Geographic book on Egypt And there it says that the main drink in Egypt was beer. They never had a cold one. They always had a warm one there. But people think it was wine. It was beer. And the pharaohs had their own brewmasters. And on the walls of one of the universities there, the hieroglyphics they deciphered, a professor from the university said, "My students are no good. All they do is carouse and drink beer. There's nothing new under the sun." There's nothing new. There is no new thing under the sun. Verse 10, is there anything whereof it might be said, see, this is new? Well, there's weapons we haven't had before, but the point is war's not new. The reason we use weapons isn't new. Hatred and greed and avarice and tyranny, none of that's new. We say, see, this is new. It hath been already of old time, which was before us. Now he says, here's the problem, but we don't remember. That's why we think something is new, because we forget what happened. There is no remembrance of former things. Neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are still coming by those that will come after that. You know, my grandfather lived in the house with us. I remember him. 1958, Thanksgiving Day, he died. I remember the undertaker carrying him out of the house. I was 8 years old. I'll never forget it. But when I go, that'll be the end of it, because my kids never knew him. Come and they go, they're forgotten. We come up with something we think is new. It isn't new. There was another generation that had it, but because we don't remember what happened then, we think that what we have is new. But after you're gone, somebody else will come up with it again and think that it was new and forget what you did. And the thing we learn from history is that we never learn from history. That's why we're in the pickle that we're in. And where does that leave us? Under the sun. It leaves us frustrated and vexed. And people who are giving their lives to try to find fulfillment are quickly coming to despair and saying life is pointless. Why should I kill myself? What's the point? What's the point? And it isn't going to change because there isn't anything new. Now, that's under the sun. That's if you're searching under the sun. If you look up above the heavens, we know this. 2 Corinthians tells us that you and I are new creatures in Christ. Old things have passed away, all things have become new. Romans tells us that we walk in newness of life. That's from above, not from under the sun. Hebrews tells us that there's a new and living way. That's from above. It's not from under the sun. Psalm 40 tells us about a new song being in our heart from God. That's not from under the sun. That's from over the sun. Revelation 21:1 says there'll be a new heavens and a new earth. The earth is not going to abide forever the way we know it. And then Revelation 21:5 says, behold, I make all things new. There are lots of new things, but they are not under the sun. It's the same old thing in monotony and continuous. But we have something new. We have the truth. Isn't it interesting? You know, I hear the church talking so much about Gen X. You know, we need to be relative. We need to figure out how to reach Gen X. Well, Gen X is already 30 years old. I don't know what Gen's after that, Gen Z or something. Who knows? But there's nothing worse than a kid watching an old person trying to be cool to relate to them. You know, seeing somebody 90 years old that dyes their hair black. You know, hey, this is fun, isn't it? Yeah, this is fun. You know, look, I look at, you know, my generation. My kids don't know who Hendrix is, who Janis Joplin was, who the Doors were, Steve Miller Band. They heard of the Beatles. I got to give them a little credit. But there's people my age that are still arguing. Are the Beatles number one or the Stones number one? And those Stones people are in denial, but, you know. But I talk to kids today. I don't know who is that you're listening to. What are they called? What do they do? And you think you have to be relative? No. I don't have to be relative. I'm crying out to you from 53 years, 30 years ahead of you, saying what you're looking for ain't under the sun. It's not in the music, because I was there. And I know the truth, and I know what you're looking for, and I know what you're longing for, and I know why you're empty, and what you're looking for is Jesus. He's our Lord, and He's our Savior, He's our shield and our buckler in every generation. And He takes away the emptiness, and He gives us life. And our message is relative to this world, because it isn't out there. And it isn't in anything that anybody can find. And it isn't all vanity. Paul will tell us this: therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain. It's not vanity. Your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Let me tell you, without Jesus, this world is an empty, deceitful place. People think if I only had, they'd find some satisfaction. This woman's been driving me crazy. I wish she'd drive off a bridge. If I could only have this woman to be my wife. This man. He's not a man, God. He's an ulcer. If I only had a real man. Solomon's saying, don't bother, I had 1,000 wives. And if you have a wedding every 2 to 3 weeks for the next 50 years, you will be as frustrated as you are now. That is not the answer. You're not searching for something that's under the sun. You are searching for something that is over the sun, that comes from heaven and doesn't come from earth. If I only could win the lottery, you see that number, you see that, I can't believe that guy won that. You see what he won, 240 million, that Powerball, I can't believe that guy. And then he goes in a bar and he leaves the money in a car and somebody strip joint, somebody takes his, if I would be a good steward, Lord, I'd give 40% to you instead of pretend, no, and and the church can get infected with the only ads. If I only had. This was a tender young man who got off course and he wandered and he filled his life with all of this stuff, he says, that is frustration and vexation. And at the end of his life, he looks back and he says, you know what? There is only one purpose for man under the sun. That's to fear God and to serve Him. Everything else is vexation. It's vanity. It's all passing away. And there's a monotony to it. If you're trying to find fulfillment in this material world, you will become suicidal. You'll become addicted because it's monotonous and it's empty. But once you get your perspective of things over the sun, I'm glad the earth never changes. I'm glad the sun comes up every day and goes down, because if it stopped one day, we'd all be dead. There would be no next generation. The coffin and cradle parade would stop. If the water didn't evaporate and rain and go down into the sea and stay in that circuit, life would not exist as we know it. All of that is a reflection of the fact that God is immutable, that He never changes, that He's consistent. That as He so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever would believe would not perish but have everlasting life. And He's saying the same today. His grace is extended to you and I every day. His mercies are new every morning. Just like the sun comes up, His mercy is there for us every day. I'm glad that God never changes, and I'm glad that creation preaches that to me every day. He is consistent, He is faithful, and He will continue the good work He's begun in every one of us. But that's not under the sun. That's over the sun. I want to challenge you. If you're here and you don't know Christ, don't play phony religious games. Don't waste your time going to church. Don't think you can join a church. You can't. You have to be born into it. You can't join. And don't come here thinking if you come to Calvary Chapel, you're going to go to heaven. All of that is frustration and it's emptiness and it's vexation. What we're trying to say to you is you have to lift your eyes above this world. There is a God who loves you, and He's died in your place, and you can know Him, and you can come into a living relationship with Him, and that changes your perspective on everything else. Because if you don't, you'll live out your life this way, trying to fill it with pleasure, trying to fill it with drugs, trying to fill it with alcohol, trying to fill it with money, trying to fill it with this. And you end up empty. You end up laying in a hospital bed saying, what was life all about? But Solomon, the wisest, richest man who ever lived, says to you, there is hope. He uses the word joy 18 times in this book. There is something worth living for. And life doesn't end when it ends in this world. It continues in the presence of God, in a new heavens and a new earth and a new city, a new life. No sorrow, no sadness, no pain. A new day, forgiveness. And I encourage you, if you're at that point of despair, of suicide, of emptiness, of frustration, of what's it all about, life is pointless, it's not worth living. Solomon understood, the wisest man ever lived, wrote the book and said, this is where you're going to be, this is the track you're on, this is the road map, and this is where you're at on it, and this is the way you can change it. I'm going to have the musicians come.